In 1895, five businessmen opened a 90-acre amusement park on the shore of Lake Erie and printed four words on every ticket, every poster, every piece of advertising the park would produce for the next 7 decades. Nothing to depress or demoralize, not to entertain, not to excite, to depress or demoralize. The language of a promise, not a slogan. For 74 seasons, the park kept that promise for some. It employed its own police force, empowered to remove anyone judged undesirable, on site, for any reason no one was required to state. It built the largest carousel to run continuously in the state, uninterrupted, for 59 years. It drew crowds of 85,000 people in a single day. Today, only the entrance archway still stands, opening onto a public park where none of this is written on a plaque. This is the story of what a promise printed on a ticket required, and who it required it of. Chapter 1. The Park That Promised. Before it is a park, it is 90 acres of farmland, quiet and unremarkable, worked for generations by the Cobb family on the southern shore of Lake Erie. The soil runs east from Cleveland along East 156th Street, flat and sandy, good for row crops and little else that anyone had thought to try. In 1880, it is acreage, and nothing more. Flat ground with no plan attached to it. It sits where the city has not yet reached, at the edge of a lake that does the work no farmer can. To the Cobbs, it is acreage, worked and reworked, and nothing besides. That edge is the whole of its future. The lake gives first, and it gives simply a natural sand beach, wide and pale, with water cold enough in June to make a Cleveland summer bearable. Long before a single mechanical ride turns on that ground, the beach is the attraction, the reason a name gets attached to a stretch of shoreline at all. Families come for the water the way families had come to lakes for a century, with blankets and baskets and no expectation of machinery. The park, when it arrives, will only be formalizing what the water had already started. Euclid Beach, before it is anything else, is a beach. What makes a beach into a business is the streetcar. Lines run out from downtown Cleveland toward the lake, cheap and frequent, and they put the gates within a single fare of hundreds of thousands of working families who own no horse and no automobile, and never will. A nickel gets a man, his wife, and their children out of the tenements and factory blocks and onto sand. Not a luxury excursion, an actual commute. The same rail that carries them to the mills on Monday carries them to the water on Sunday. The distance between labor and leisure in Cleveland in the 1890s is measured in transfers, not miles. On October 23, 1894, 5 men make the beach official: John Irwin, Hylas Gladwish, Albert Thompson, John Flynn, and Jerome Burroughs file incorporation papers for a resort they intend as the Midwest's answer to Coney Island. The same crowds, the same nickel economy, the same promise of a day bought cheap. New York already has its model. Cleveland, they believe, only needs its own version of it, built on cheaper land with the same streetcar logic. 5 signatures, and a stretch of former farmland becomes, on paper, a business. The park opens for its first season on June 22, 1895, under a manager named William Ryan. There are vaudeville acts. There is a beer garden. There are gambling tables set up under canvas and sideshows pulled from the same traveling circuit that supplies every resort on the Great Lakes that summer. Ryan runs it the way every lakeside operator of his era runs one: fill the grounds with cheap spectacle, sell beer at the gate, and let the beach do the rest. It is, by design, a version of Coney Island scaled down and shipped west. It is also, by every measure that matters to the men who financed it, ordinary, and unprofitable. The formula that draws crowds to Coney Island draws smaller, thinner crowds here, indistinguishable from what a dozen other lakeside resorts are attempting that same season up and down the shoreline from Buffalo to Chicago. Beer gardens and sideshows do not separate one park from another. They only prove that the operators had read the same trade papers. Euclid Beach will lose money quietly, season after season, doing exactly what it was built to do. And somewhere inside that losing operation, unnoticed by the men who signed the incorporation papers, a single concession stand is about to start earning more than the rest of the park combined. Chapter 2. The Popcorn Stand. The stand belongs to a family named Humphrey. Connecticut-born, they arrive in Cleveland sometime in the middle 1890s carrying almost nothing, having already lost one enterprise in lumber and a second in farming before either had the chance to fail slowly. They do not arrive to found a park. They arrive to sell popcorn from a single stand wedged between the beer garden and the sideshow tents, inside a resort that is losing money in exactly the manner already described, quietly and without apparent remedy. At Euclid Beach in those first seasons, it draws no attention beyond its own row. It is one concession among a dozen, no larger than any other, its trade unremarkable next to the vaudeville bills and the gambling tables that draw the crowds, or fail to. In 1897, the Humphreys formalized what they have been doing piecemeal. They found the Humphrey Popcorn Company, selling from the original stand inside the park and from a second stand set up on Cleveland's public square downtown miles from the lake. Popcorn and candy kisses. The margins are small, the product perishable, the operation modest by any measure that mattered to the men who had signed the park's incorporation papers. And yet the popcorn stand turns a steady profit season after season, while the amusement park built around it does not. Not spectacular, not remarked upon in the trade papers, steady. In a business hemorrhaging money on beer gardens and sideshow barkers, that steadiness is its own kind of proof. By 1901, that proof has a name attached to it, Dudley S. Humphrey, who buys the entire park outright from its original investors. Not a partial stake, an actual purchase of every acre, every ride, every lease on the grounds. He does not renovate the sideshows, or restock the beer garden, or expand the gambling tables that had until then been the park's chief draw. He removes them. The beer garden is torn out within his first season as owner. Gambling of every kind is banned. Entirely, without exception. The sideshows are shut down. Where the old Euclid Beach had tried, unsuccessfully, to out-Coney Coney Island, Humphrey's Euclid Beach sets out to be nothing like it at all. The new slogans go up on signage across the grounds, blunt as the man who wrote them: one fare, free gate, no beer. Nothing to depress or demoralize. Admission itself becomes free. Visitors pay only per ride, a structural change as consequential as any of the moral ones, since it means the park now profits from crowds that are large, orderly, and inclined to return rather than from crowds merely willing to pay once at a gate. A dress code is enforced at the entrance. Visitors judged inappropriately attired are turned away before they reach it. Inside, Humphrey's own hired park police, his police, not the city's, remove anyone judged disorderly. A private force answerable to a popcorn seller who now owns 90 acres of lakefront and the moral tone of everyone who walks onto it. The stand by the sideshow tents has become, within 4 years, the office from which the whole park is governed. Attendance climbs through the decade that follows. Cleveland families who would not have brought their children to a beer garden and a gambling hall bring them instead to Humphrey's version of the same 90 acres, adopting it gradually and then completely as the respectable alternative to every rowdier resort on the lake. What those families are walking into in 1910 has not been built yet. 9 years stand between the popcorn stand and the ride that will define the park in every photograph taken of it for the 6 decades to follow. Chapter 3. The Carousel and the Wheel. In 1910, the wait ends. A crew assembles the new ride piece by piece on a concrete slab near the lake path, working the way carousel builders of the era always work. Frame first, then the gears, and the center pole. Then the horses lifted into place one by one until the ring closes. A ring of more than 50 hand-carved horses, no two identical manes frozen mid-toss, flanks painted in the gaudy palette that only a woodcarver working for children ever risks. Cherry reds, brass yellows, the kind of blue that does not exist on any real horse. 2 chariots ride among them, ornate as anything Humphrey has put up on the grounds, gilded and scrolled for parents who would rather sit than straddle, their panels carved with scroll work deep enough to hold shadow even at noon. A band organ drives the whole assembly, brass pipes and drums timed to the turning platform, the pinned cylinder inside grinding out the same marches and waltzes on a loop, loud enough to carry past the picnic groves and out toward the water. This is the Grand Carousel. It will still be turning 59 years later, on the last day the park is ever open. Long before the carousel exists, though, another machine already lifts riders over this same ground. The circle swing predates Humphrey's showpiece, its exact opening year lost between 2 dates in the record. What it offers has nothing to do with horses or gilding. Riders climb into wicker gondolas hung from a tall central tower, baskets built light enough to swing and strong enough to hold a family. And when the machine spins up, the gondolas fly outward on long steel cables, swinging out over the heads of the crowd below, the whole tower groaning under the load, then back, then out again. Faster with each pass until the riders are looking straight down at the upturned faces on the ground. Not a ride you sit through, a ride you hang from. The frame outlasts its own century. In 1927, the park rebuilds the cars as airplanes. Fuselages and wings bolted where the wicker baskets used to hang, chasing the same aviation fever that has gripped every county fair and boardwalk in the country since Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic and put his face on every newsreel and front page in America. Children who cannot yet spell aviator beg to ride the wings. 11 years later, in 1938, the cars change again. Rocket ships this time, styled after Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, the comic strip spacemen already familiar from Sunday funnies and Saturday matinee serials, fins and portholes stamped out of sheet metal, the whole machine renamed the rocket ships for a generation of children who will never know it as anything else. Same tower, same cables. 3 different decades, 3 different futures sold to the same crowd for the price of 1 ticket. 2 rides now anchor the park, and both of them, in their own way, are gentle. One turns in a circle, painted horses catching the light, a carousel meant to be watched as much as ridden. One flies out and returns, a tower built to thrill without ever quite frightening. Neither asks a rider to trust anything more than a wooden horse or a swinging cable, and neither is built to break a nerve. That changes soon. The men backing Humphrey's Park are already looking at steeper machinery, faster machinery, the kind that costs real money and answers to gravity rather than a band organ. 3 years stand between the carousel's opening and the first true coaster on these 90 acres, and the ground that once only turned and swung is about to learn how to drop. Chapter 4. The Unwritten Gate. 3 years pass, as promised, and the ground learns to drop. In 1913, Euclid Beach spends $45,000 on the Derby Racer, a side-by-side wooden coaster designed by John A. Miller and built by Frederick Ingersoll, 2 men who are, at that exact moment, rewriting the rule book for what a wooden track is allowed to do to a paying customer. Miller's patents on friction wheels and anti-rollback devices are still new enough to be a selling point rather than an industry standard. A park that hires him is buying not just a ride, but a reputation for speed that its competitors cannot yet match. 2 trains race down parallel tracks, 72 riders at a time, the cars climbing on chain lift with the particular ratcheting clatter that tells a waiting crowd exactly how much height it is about to lose. The fence fills before the first heat runs. Spectators pick a side, a red car or a white one, and cheer it home the way they might a horse, which is the entire point of a ride built to resemble a race, and named before long accordingly. The investment does not linger as debt. Ticket sales retire the full $45,000 within a single season, a payback period fast enough to answer any question about whether Cleveland wanted speed more than it wanted a carousel. The ride is renamed the Racing Coaster, and it runs that way for decades. A fixture that outlasts the paint, the platform, and the wooden track itself, replanked board by board, as each season's frost heaves the ground it stands on. 11 years later, the park doubles down. The Thriller opens in 1924, a wooden coaster with a first drop past 71 feet, the kind of drop that empties a rider's stomach a half second before the track levels and throws the weight back into the seat. It becomes almost immediately the most popular ride on the grounds. More popular than the racing coaster, more popular than the carousel that once anchored the park's entire identity. On the best days of its early seasons, 3 trains run at once, each one built from 3 4-bench cars, each car full. The line at the entrance never quite emptying before the next train locks into place and the ratchet starts again. In a decade and a half, Humphrey's Park has gone from a place that sold gentle circular motion to a place engineered to drop its customers 70 feet at a time and sell the drop as wholesome family recreation, printed exactly that way on the signage at the gate. Wholesome is the word on the signs. Behind it sits a policy the park never printed on any sign at all. As early as 1899, Euclid Beach had already been sued over how it decided who could pass through its gates. By roughly 1915, the practice had hardened into something closer to policy. The park, along with its rival Luna Park across the city, admitted black visitors only on certain designated days and turned them away on the rest, a schedule known by word of mouth rather than by any posted calendar. The same private police force enforced Humphrey's nothing to depress or demoralize standard. The officers stationed at the turnstiles, the ones who removed the drunk, who broke up the fights, who escorted out the disorderly, they applied the unwritten rule at the same gates, on the same shifts, as a routine part of admitting the crowd. It required no separate department and no special signage. It needed only the discretion already built into who got waved through and who got stopped for questioning at the turnstile. You could walk the Midway in 1924, buy a ticket for the Thriller, ride it twice, and never learn the rule existed unless you were the one it applied to. It appeared in no newspaper advertisement, no dress code placard, no printed rule handed out at the trolley stop. It was simply enforced gate by gate, shift by shift, season after season, for years, by men whose job description also included keeping the Midway looking exactly as wholesome as the signs promised. The Derby racer would keep running into the 1960s, the gate policy would run almost as long beside it, and the crowds kept arriving regardless, by the end of the next decade, in numbers that would make the 90 acres feel, on the right Saturday, like the entire city of Cleveland had decided to show up at once. Chapter 5. 85,000. In 1930, a new machine went up near the lake, the Flying Turns, and it obeyed no rails at all. Its cars ran open and free through channels of banked wood, banking into each curve the way water banks into a channel, and there was no track underneath to tell them where to go except the wood itself, curved into a fixed shape. Riders felt it before they understood it. The sensation of being thrown, not guided, the car finding its own line through the turn each time. Never quite the same twice. The physics were simple enough to explain and strange enough to ride twice in a row. It was not a coaster in the ordinary sense, the kind with a fixed rail and a predictable drop. It was a chute with cars in it. Cleveland had never seen anything like it. The Flying Turns joined a lineup that had been growing for 3 decades. By the time the ride opened, Euclid Beach had built and operated 7 wooden roller coasters across its history. Not 7 models of the same machine, but 7 distinct rides, each replacing or standing beside the last, each drawing its own line of visitors down the midway. One generation of coaster gave way to the next the way one summer gives way to the next, without ceremony, without anyone marking the exact turn. Some parks had one signature coaster and built a reputation around it. Euclid Beach built 7 and let none of them define the place alone. The park was by the 1930s not a single attraction remembered fondly. It was an accumulation. That accumulation had a ceiling, and by the middle of the century, Cleveland found it. Single-day attendance at Euclid Beach reached as many as 85,000 people. 85,000 human beings, moving through 90 acres between the archway and the lake, on a single Saturday, under a single gate. No other draw in the city moved that many people through one entrance in one afternoon. Not the ballpark, not the department stores downtown, not the churches on a holiday. The 1921 arch, lit at night, lettered in the park's own signage, had by then become shorthand for all of it. Say Euclid Beach to a Clevelander of that generation, and the image that arrived first was not a ride. It was the arch itself, the threshold you passed under to leave one version of the city and enter another. Humphrey sold its popcorn balls by the tens of thousands that same summer, made from corn grown on the family's own farm in Wakeman. The company grew its own supply and still could not keep pace. Picture it. A July Saturday, late in the 1940s, the archway lit against a sky still bright at 7 in the evening. Streetcars pull up and empty every few minutes, releasing families in loose clusters onto the pavement below the arch's lettering. Somewhere behind the entrance, the Thriller's cars are clattering up the 71-foot lift hill, the chain drive audible even over the crowd, and near the midway the Carousel's band organ is fighting the barkers at the popcorn stand for the same stretch of air. The smell is popcorn and lake water and hot pavement. For most of the people passing beneath that arch tonight, everything the park's own slogan promised them was simply true. For a few of them, walking toward the same lit letters, the promise came with terms nobody had bothered to print. Those terms had held for years without needing to be tested, absorbed quietly. One summer folded into the next, the way the archway absorbed the evening light and gave it back as welcome. 85,000 people a day is not a number that stays still for long, and a number that size does not stay simple for long either. Somewhere in that crowd, every single summer, were people counting something the park itself was not counting. That was about to change. Chapter 6. The Summer of 1946. The counting had a name by the summer of 1946, and the name was organized. The American Youth for Democracy sent members. The United Negroes and Allied Veterans of America sent members. The National Negro Congress sent members. 3 organizations, 1 coalition, a single purpose: to walk through the archway together, black and white, and stay there, on the sand, in the pavilions, past the point where anyone could pretend not to notice. Euclid Beach had never posted a sign saying who could not enter. It had never needed to. The exclusion lived in ushers who steered certain families towards certain rides and away from others, in dance hall doormen who found reasons, in a policy so unwritten it could be denied in the same breath it was enforced. The coalition intended to force it into writing, one way or another. The visits began on July 21st, 1946. They were deliberate, timed, coordinated, repeated. Not a single afternoon of protest, but a campaign, week after week, through a park that had spent 40 years perfecting the appearance of a place without conflict. The ushers steered. The doormen found their reasons. The visits continued anyway. The same coalition returning the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. Something that had held for decades without being tested was now being tested every week in public by people who had no intention of stopping. On August 23, 1946, it stopped holding. The confrontation that the coalition had been building toward, and that Euclid Beach had been avoiding since the archway first opened, arrived as a riot. Scuffles breaking out across the grounds, a chaos the park's private police force could not, or would not, contain. It was not the last incident of the summer. It was not even the worst. 8 days later, on August 31st, a Euclid Beach patrolman named Julius Vago attacked a man named Albert Luster. Luster worked for the Cleveland Transit System. He belonged to the Congress of Racial Equality. Vago fractured his skull. The record does not soften into ambiguity here. A park employee in a park uniform broke open a visitor's head with enough force to crack bone, and the visitor's offense, the only one anyone alleged, was standing in a place he had been told, wordlessly, for decades, not to stand. The season did not recover from it. Scuffles, a beating, a shooting. The litany accumulated through the summer until Euclid Beach did something it had not done in 51 years of operation. It closed. Not for a day. Not for the incident. It shut its gates for the remainder of the 1946 season. The ride silent. The archway dark earlier than it had ever been dark by design rather than by hour. Management had a choice to make before the gates reopened, and in 1947, it made it. Not integration, not a written policy replacing the unwritten one in either direction. Instead, the dance hall and the roller rink were handed off to a private operator, placed one legal step removed from the park itself, where whatever rules the new lessee chose to enforce would not be Euclid Beach's problem to explain, and the bathhouse, the building that had once let 85,000 people a day change into swimsuits and walk down to the water, simply did not open, not closed for repairs, and not closed for a season to be reconsidered later. It simply stayed shut, with no announced date for anything else. The water was still there. The beach was still there. What Euclid Beach had lost that year permanently was the closest thing it had ever had to an argument for itself, that the archway meant welcome, full stop, for everyone who walked under it. That argument did not survive 1946. Other things were coming for the park too, slower than a riot, but no less final, and the first of them was already threading its rails through the streets of a city about to start pulling away. Chapter 7. The Math Turns. The trouble was, arithmetic does not care about nostalgia. For 68 years, Euclid Beach had run on a simple exchange. A family paid a nickel, then a dime, then a quarter for a trolley ride out along the lakeshore, and the park paid them back in an afternoon they would remember for decades. That exchange ended on a specific date. In 1963, the trolley line that had carried grandparents and then their grandchildren to the gates for a single fare stopped running, and with it went the cheapest, most dependable machine the park had ever owned for filling itself with people who could not otherwise easily arrive. No announcement replaced it. The track simply went quiet, and the crowds that had once poured off the streetcars in the thousands now had to find another way in, or not come at all. Nothing replaced it in kind. The interstate highway system, spreading its overpasses and clover leaves across northern Ohio through the 1950s and into the 1960s, made a car in a driveway more useful than a trolley stop ever had been, and it made distance cheap in a way Euclid Beach's founders had never had to plan for. A family with a car did not have to choose Euclid Beach. They could drive past it entirely, to Cedar Point, west along the lake, or to Kennywood, outside Pittsburgh, or to Geauga Lake, south, and growing every season the highway improved. The park's oldest advantage, proximity, stopped mattering the moment everyone owned a way around it. What had once been a destination became, for many drivers, simply an exit they did not take. And then the lake itself turned. Lake Erie had given the park its name and its founding appeal. Cool water, a real beach. Relief from a Cleveland summer. Through the 1950s and 1960s, that water absorbed what the region's factories and sewers put into it, more each year, until the beach that had once been the reason for the whole enterprise became a place people were warned away from. The rides had never needed an excuse beyond themselves, but now they ran beside a shoreline nobody wanted to swim from, and a resort built around water was left explaining, implicitly, why the water no longer mattered to the price of a ticket. By the late 1960s, 7 wooden roller coasters were still turning on the same wooden bones they had been built on, some of them dating to the 1890s, most to the years before the Depression. Dozens of smaller rides ran alongside them on structures just as old, none of it built to last 70 years. All of it now demanding the kind of constant, unglamorous maintenance that old wood and old iron require of anyone still asking them to carry passengers at speed. The upkeep did not get cheaper with age. The crowds, thinned by the dead trolley line and the open highway and the ruined beach, did not get bigger to pay for it. Underneath the rides sat 90 acres of lakefront land, taxed accordingly, at rates that climbed through the decade while ticket revenue moved the other direction. 2 lines on a chart that had once run parallel now crossing. Park leadership did not dress the problem up. The taxes were too great, they said, and the revenue was too small. It was not a complaint. It was a ledger, read aloud. On June 7, 1968, Park President Dudley Humphrey stood before that ledger and closed it. Euclid Beach, he announced, would shut permanently at the end of the following season. There was no farewell tour attached to the statement, no final summer built around the fact of its finality. Only a date, more than a year out, fixed now on a calendar that had never before had an ending printed on it. Every ride still running that afternoon would run through one more season, and only one. Somewhere inside that final season, on some ordinary day nobody would think to mark, each of them would be ridden for the last time. Chapter 8, What Remains? That one more season came due on September 28, 1969, the last night of the park's 74th summer, and Euclid Beach Park closed its gates for the final time. No ceremony marked the closing beyond the plain fact of it. The last customer through the turnstile, the last cash drawer counted, the lights over the midway switched off in the order they had always been switched off, except that this time no one switched them back on. Demolition followed soon after, crews arriving to take down what 74 seasons had built. What remained afterward was not the park, but a set of decisions about what to keep. Not everything went to the wrecking crews. The Grand Carousel was sold intact and shipped east to Palace Playland, an amusement park on the boardwalk at Old Orchard Beach, Maine, and there its horses turned under a different sky for the next quarter century. New riders climbed onto them who had never heard the name Euclid Beach and had no reason to. The ride kept turning. The park it came from did not. Palace Playland closed in 1996, and the carousel that had once stood at the center of Euclid Beach went looking, for a second time in its life, for somewhere to belong. In July of 1997, it came up for auction in Olmsted Township, Ohio, at a memorabilia show built entirely around the park's own memory, a room full of people who had grown up on that ride, bidding to decide where it would spend what was left of its life. The Trust for Public Land won the bid for all 54 horses and 2 chariots at $715,000. The carousel that had left Cleveland in the back of someone else's business plan came home in the custody of people who had no plan for it beyond keeping it. Restoration took years, carried out at Carousel Works in Mansfield, Ohio, horse by horse, hoof by hoof, the paint stripped back to bare wood and rebuilt in layers no rider would ever see or need to. In the fall of 2014, the Grand Carousel reopened to riders at the Western Reserve Historical Society's Cleveland History Center in University Circle. It still runs there most weekends. The same horses that once turned above the Lake Erie shoreline now turn 8 miles inland, under a roof instead of open sky, ridden by children who have no memory of the water it was built beside. One structure survived on the original 90 acres without ever having to leave them. The entrance archway, raised in 1921, still stands where it was built, framing what used to be the start of every summer for 3 generations of Cleveland families. The city designated it a historic landmark in 1973. It now marks the entrance to a public lakefront park operated by Cleveland Metro Parks, on the eastern portion of the ground where the Midway once ran. A gate still standing at the edge of the lake, no longer sorting who was permitted through it and who was not. The business born inside the park outlived the park itself. The Humphrey Company still makes popcorn and taffy today, at a plant in Warrensville Heights, Ohio, from recipes little changed since they were sold under that same archway. The same product that once filled a single stand on Public Square before the park even existed is still sold in Cleveland stores now, more than 100 years after that first stand opened. It is the one part of Euclid Beach that never had to be rebuilt, restored, or bought back at auction, because it never stopped operating long enough to need saving. Where the Thriller's lift hill once rose, and where the racing coaster once crossed its own finish line, there is grass now, mowed, ordinary, indistinguishable from any other stretch of public ground, bordered by a mobile home community backed up against the old tree line. The only vertical thing left standing on that stretch of shoreline is a single stone arch, pale against the gray of a lake sky, alone in the open field, with nothing built beside it and nothing built behind it. It was raised to be walked through, an announcement of arrival and a boundary between the ordinary world and the place where 85,000 people once came on a single Saturday to forget it. Now the wind off Lake Erie moves through that same opening the way it moves through any gap in any wall, entering nothing, leading to nothing, arriving at nothing but more grass. The lake is still there. The arch is still standing. Nothing else is.